All right, this will be our last recording for Chapter 3. In the last couple sections, we've been looking at the function of the cell membrane. What are the processes that have to occur along this phospholipid bilayer in order for a cell to survive? One of the most important ones is passive transport. We have to get movement of molecules from one side of the membrane to the other without the cell using energy. If the cell had to use energy for everything that it did, it would never be able to create enough ATP in order to keep itself alive. So passive transport across that semipermeable membrane, either through osmosis or through diffusion, is incredibly important for the survival of a cell. Now in this section we're going to look at active transport. There are some things that the cell has to expend energy to move across that cell membrane. So active transport is different in that the cell is actively using energy to move something against its concentration gradient. That's the key component. If it was able to move along its concentration gradient by itself, the cell wouldn't have to expend any energy. But these are molecules that have to rely upon the cell to move them from where they are not very concentrated to an area where they are highly concentrated. So we're forcing these molecules to move up their concentration gradient, which does take energy to make it happen. This is really important for the maintaining of homeostasis within a cell. Cells have to keep a certain number of certain molecules on each side of the cell membrane in order to stay balanced. And so for that to happen, sometimes the cell does have to use a membrane protein and some energy to force those molecules up their concentration gradient to where they're highly concentrated. Another method that we see is endocytosis and exocytosis. These two processes, they're very, very similar to each other, and they're just a way for a cell to move either a large number of molecules or very large molecules across the cell membrane. What they do here, as you can see in this image, we have all these very large compounds on the outside of the cell. The extracellular fluid, that's just the outside. These need to get into the cell. Well, they're much too large to pass through the cell membrane itself. They're even too large to pass through a membrane protein. And so the cell has another process. If these molecules settle down onto the cell membrane, which is this yellow line, the cell membrane itself will dimple and it will form a pocket. The sides of that pocket will begin to close up until they meet, forming a little bubble. That bubble then moves inside the cell, and it is a vesicle. It's a little membrane-bound chamber that's holding on to some particle. So we moved a green molecule from the outside to the inside of the cell through a process called endocytosis, which uses a vesicle. Now let's say this is a piece of food. Well, that vesicle will go join with a lysosome, and the digestive enzymes in the lysosome will break down this molecule, and it'll be a food source for the cell. If the cell has some large waste molecules, let's say, that it needs to get rid of, let's say that this is a bacteria that invaded the cell, it killed it, and now all these waste particles have to be removed. Well, they're too big to go through the membrane, so a vesicle, we're going to take the process in the opposite direction now, will simply move towards the cell membrane. When it touches the bubble, the membrane will pop. It'll open up, the membrane will flatten out, and this little molecule will move to the outside of the cell. This one is called exocytosis. It's just the process of expelling something or removing something from the cell using a vesicle. This is an important process, and the cell uses this process all the time because, like I said, there are many very large molecules that have to move across that cell membrane, and there really is no other way to do it. All right, it looks like that's the end of Chapter 3. So if you have any questions about any of the 5 sections, either go back and listen to the recordings again, or come see me in class and we can go over them together.